Hello, I am Sientir, and welcome to my Patron Podcast for, July 2021. As you might tell, the winning topic was something Star Trek related, specifically my thoughts on Star Trek Picard Season 1. There will be, inevitably, some spoilers here, because there's no way I can talk about my thoughts on this without talking about what happens. So, if you want to have a voice in future topics, you can go ahead and check out my Patreon at patreon.com/Sientir. The patrons there get to submit topics and vote on them to select what I will be talking about for the month. So, let's go ahead and launch into it. Let's go ahead and start just at some higher level thoughts structurally. Star Trek Picard, of course, follows Jean-Luc Picard after his illustrious career in Starfleet. And then it kind of is focused on him sort of post that and some of the traumatic things that happened. And is a very different tone to a lot of Star Trek shows. It feels like I usually think of Star Trek as being a very optimistic universe. And Star Trek Picard takes a much darker look at the universe. It sets kind of a darker base point. I think fundamentally it ends in sort of an optimistic place, but it feels very lacking in that optimism in the start. I think that kind of is reflective of where Picard is at and what he's feeling. And but it definitely makes for a very different tone, a very different feel. And it took a while for me to kind of acclimate to it. I kind of prefer my Star Trek to be like, there's so many things that have a cynical view of life, a cynical view of society, that I really appreciate the optimistic view that Star Trek has traditionally taken. And so having a show that kind of has more of that cynical view, particularly earlier on, was something that I found not quite what I want from Star Trek. The other thing is the show is just very differently paced. It's a very slow pacing to the show. Reminded me a lot of Dragon Ball Z, actually. It reminds me of that favorite joke of my sister's and mine. How many Dragon Ball Z characters does it take to change a light bulb? 1, but it takes 3 episodes. Star Trek Picard kind of has that sort of thing going on a little bit. But I think that they spend that well, because they use it to really give the characters room to breathe and give the characters room to kind of relate to each other, to have moments and things like that. So the show is very character focused in that regard. It is not trying to move the plot quickly. It has a very steady pace, but it reminds me kind of The Turtle and the Hare, where the turtle keeps up a steady, slow pace, where the hare thinks it's so far ahead that it then sleeps through the turtle passing it. But that slow, steady pace allows it to be able to stop and smell the character roses better. And that's something that I have very mixed feelings on, actually. It felt like I had to watch 2 episodes at a time to get an episode's worth of plot. But that's not because stuff wasn't happening. It's because a lot of that focus was on giving the characters a lot more room to kind of breathe and exist. So your mileage may vary on that. I have mixed feelings about that personally. There's things that I like about it, and there's things that I dislike. So, in terms of the overall story, I think that I have mixed feelings about some of the stuff that they did with some of the characters. I'm not entirely sure how I feel about 7 of 9. Again, it's that cynical edge, and I kind of don't like how cynical things are, but it also is like a show that's saying things have ended up in kind of a dark, cynical place. How do we get out of it? And that is through an optimism and the hopefulness, to some extent. Like, Picard is a show about Picard returning optimism to the state of things that in many regards has gone in a very dark place. People are scared following stuff that's happened with the attack on Mars. And I don't know how much that's like actively like getting to a lot of people, but it's clearly weighing heavily on Picard, as well as a number of the other characters. And I think that they did a really interesting job, like, pulling all of those characters sort of together in terms of a common thread and the overall plot. And I'll be very curious to see what they do with season 2 and 3, because this first season had a very clear sort of direction that they wanted to take it, very clear sort of sense of like, here's the story we want to tell, but it felt very much so like it belonged to just one season. So I'll be very curious to see where they go. Like, this chapter is very clearly closed. They worked through the stuff that they wanted to work through, particularly dealing with the synthetics and Romulans and Picard mourning Data. And so where they're going to end up in terms of the next seasons, I'll be very, very curious to see, because it doesn't feel bounded by anything that's happened in this first season. But that's something else that I really liked about it. I liked that it felt like it was a complete story, that they establish a sense of mystery. They expand on that mystery well, opening it up, showing us what's going on. And then they do a really good job of bringing it to, I thought, a satisfactory conclusion. So overall, I would say that I enjoyed this first season of Star Trek Picard. But I also, it took a little bit to get there. It really did. The slower pacing meant that it just took longer to kind of get through some of the things that were happening. But so much of it is character focused that I don't necessarily think I'd want it to be faster paced, if that makes sense. It's kind of weird, where it's like it's a little slower than I'd like, but at the same time, like, they really needed to let the characters breathe, because so much of it is about the characters kind of working through stuff that they needed space for that. So even if like the general plot isn't advancing much, they really needed to make sure that they had space for the characters to be able to kind of process everything that was going on, because so much of it was about the characters working through stuff. So I did think that some of the stuff that they were doing with the what do they call it? The artifact was really interesting. The leftover Borg cube and reclaiming the Borg, the XBs. And all that was kind of neat. It was neat to have some character cameos of just like people showing back up. Don't know if I like, again, not sure I like how they handled stuff with Hugh and 7 of 9 in particular. In part, like, Hugh I think at least was able to go out well, but 7 of 9, my main thing is like, and what they did with Icheb, just, I mean, having a character like that just ended like that without the chance to really get more screen time is a little sad. Maybe they'll give Icheb something that takes place before Picard. That could certainly be something that they could do. But it was also nice to kind of like see that they remember the character. So I don't know, a little bit of a mixed bag in that regard. Do I have any other particular thoughts about the season? It was really interesting having a different sort of ship. Like, a lot of the time we have a very... Because, okay, where's my brain going on this? So the ship in this was not... It was basically a big flying box. And so having sort of the bridge at the front of a box gave a lot of interesting depth and sort of space for them to work with. Whereas a lot of the time in Star Trek shows, the ships, I mean, if it's something like that, it's a very small shuttle, right? This was not a small shuttle, but what we kind of fundamentally had here was the ship was like... had a lot of depth of space, which we don't really have on a lot of the ships. Like, even in like Next Gen or Voyager or whatever, the bridge is a fairly contained space, right? Like, it doesn't go back like that. So I thought that was kind of an interesting sort of difference. It allowed them to do stuff, especially with like the engine glow sort of panels from sort of the engineering section in the back. It gave a very different sense of space, and I liked them exploring a different style of starship in Star Trek, because a lot of the time, like, we see sort of similar-ish things, and having more of an open concept design with it was really interesting. And I really enjoyed the antics of I forget the captain's name off the top of my head, but of all of the emergency holograms that were based off of him exhibiting different characteristics. That was a lot of fun, and I definitely enjoyed those shenanigans and antics. So anyway, I think that's overall a pretty good summary of my thoughts. Like I said, it was a show that kind of grew on me. I have mixed feelings about the pacing, but I like that it kind of is saying or providing an example of somebody who's in a very cynical place, and really kind of a group of people that are in very cynical places reclaiming optimism, reclaiming hope. And that's something that I think is really important for people at all times. So, and also the importance of love and compassion and overcoming fear and being willing to sacrifice yourself for those that you care about, because even that willingness can then change them if they're in a hostile position. So anyway, thank you all very much for watching, and until next month, you can find me at my Patreon at patreon.com/Sientir, where I do daily updates about what's going on in my life, and you can also have a voice in choosing these topics. And until next time, everyone, thank you for listening. Take care, and goodbye.